The swinging door opened softly, the quiet sound echoing in the silence of the empty restaurant. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the tiled floor. It was early, and José's restaurant was still deserted. The old clock on the wall, with creaking hands, had just struck 6, and he knew that the regulars would only start showing up around 6:30. José, a portly man with an easy smile, was already used to this routine. He knew she would arrive soon, as she did every day, almost punctual as clockwork. And there she was, the woman who always showed up at the same time, moving slowly to the swivel chair at the counter. She sat down without saying anything, as if this place were already an extension of her own home. Between her lips, an unlit cigarette dangled lazily. "My queen," José said upon seeing her, in a tone of familiarity. He walked to the other side of the counter, his heavy shoes echoing on the aged wooden boards, as he wiped the shiny surface with a dry cloth. It was an almost mechanical gesture, something he did whenever someone came in, a kind of ritual. Even with her, with whom he had developed a more intimate and uncomplicated relationship, José maintained his routine of a dedicated and attentive worker. With a playful look and a lopsided smile, he asked, "Do you want me to teach you how to be a lady first?" The woman, sitting with the cigarette still unlit between her thin fingers, raised an eyebrow and calmly replied, "José, you didn't even notice that my cigarette is unlit. Subscribe to our channel for more love stories." He frowned in surprise. "I hadn't noticed," he admitted, a little flustered. She smiled slightly, but it was a smile filled with something deeper. "You still haven't realized a lot of things," she murmured, her voice barely audible. José, still trying to understand the subtlety behind the words, left the cloth on the counter and went to the dark cabinets at the back of the restaurant. They were old, impregnated with the smell of tar and grease that had accumulated over the years. From there, he took a small box of matches and returned, with his rough, hairy hands ready to light the woman's cigarette. She leaned forward slightly, and when José lit the match, the flame illuminated her face for a brief moment. The soft glow of the fire revealed the contours of her features, while her voluminous hair, covered in cheap Vaseline, shone in the dim light. The black dress she was wearing hugged her curves discreetly, giving her a simple but melancholy beautiful appearance. "You look beautiful today, my queen," José commented, without thinking much, just observing her with affection. "Stop being silly," she replied seriously, letting out a puff of smoke. "Do you think this will help me pay what I owe you?" José, taken aback, tried to correct himself. "That's not what I meant, queen. I bet today's lunch made you feel bad, right?" She inhaled the smoke slowly, letting it escape her lips in a resigned sigh. She crossed her arms, resting her elbows on the counter, and looked out the large glass window at the street. Outside, the city continued at its normal pace, but there was something in the way she looked that betrayed a silent sadness, as if she were waiting for something that would never come. "I'll make you a good steak," José suggested, trying to ease the tension. "I don't have any money," she said without emotion, without even looking away from the street. "I've been broke for 3 months, and you always make me something. Today, I can't pay you." "Don't worry about it," José replied, walking over to the stove. "Today is different." "Really?" she replied, still staring at the horizon, where the city lights were starting to flicker, one by one. José took a piece of meat from the fridge, opened the lid of the pan, and turned on the heat. As the steak began to sizzle in the pan, the familiar smell of melted butter and seasoned meat filled the air of the small restaurant. The atmosphere was filled with a cozy, almost inviting warmth, which contrasted with the silence between them. She took another drag, this time longer, and said, "Today is different, but not for the reason you think, José. I came to say goodbye." He paused for a moment, the sound of the steak sizzled in the background, as he tried to process her words. "To say goodbye?" he asked, not hiding the tone of surprise in his voice. "Yes," she replied, finally turning to him. I'm leaving tomorrow. I don't know where, but I know I won't be coming back. Jose was at a loss for words for a moment. What do you say to someone who makes such a revelation, all of a sudden? He went back to work on the stove, stirring the steak as if that were the only thing he could control at that moment. I'll miss you, Queen, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. But if that's what you want, who am I to stop you? She smiled at the corner of her mouth. It's not what I want, Jose. It's what I need to do. Silence once again dominated the space, while the two remained there, each lost in their own thoughts. The smell of the steak was already filling the entire restaurant, and Jose. With a resigned sigh, he knew that this would be the last dinner he would prepare for his queen. Every day is the same, Jose said with a sigh, as he rummaged through the refrigerator. The clock strikes 6, you come in and say you have nothing, and I prepare something good for you. The only thing that changes is what you say. The woman, with the cigarette between her fingers, looked away from the window and finally turned to him. But today is really different, she insisted, her voice heavy with something that Jose could not immediately identify. She watched him with a mixture of determination and tiredness, as if the weight of the day was on her shoulders. Jose, on the other side of the counter, continued to rummage through the refrigerator shelves, looking for something to prepare. There was silence between them, as he pulled out a tray of meat, without rushing. She followed him with her eyes, her thoughts distant, stuck in something she didn't seem to want to say. For 23 long seconds, silence hung in the air, only broken by the soft noise of the refrigerator. The woman said nothing, but her eyes conveyed a melancholy that could not be overlooked. Finally, Jose looked at the clock on top of the cabinet. The hand had just reached 3 minutes past 6. Today is different, isn't it? He said, more to himself than to her, taking a deep breath as he closed the refrigerator door. The woman exhaled smoke from her cigarette and, in a brief and direct tone, replied, "Today I didn't arrive at 6, that's why it's different." Jose frowned, confused. The clock, always accurate, was showing the usual time. "I'll bet my arm that this clock wasn't even a minute late," he said, casting a suspicious glance at the old hour marker. "It's not that, Jose," the woman insisted, now with a firm look. "Today I didn't arrive at 6. I arrived 15 minutes early." Jose paused for a moment, his hand still holding the tray of meat. "It just struck 6 when you came in," he replied, convinced. "I saw you arrive when the clock struck 6, as usual." She shook her head with a faint smile of tiredness. "I've been here for a quarter of an hour," she replied calmly but firmly. Jose, sensing that something was wrong, put the tray down on the counter and approached. His expression, previously relaxed, now seemed full of concern. He stopped very close to her, his eyes fixed on hers, searching for answers that were not being said. Leaning down slightly, he gently pulled the skin of her eyelid with his finger and, in an almost childish gesture, asked, "Blow here." The woman immediately backed away, her expression hardening. She looked at him, irritated and tired, surrounded by an aura of sadness that seemed to get worse by the second. "Stop this nonsense, Jose," she said firmly. "You know I haven't had a drink in over 6 months." Jose raised his hands in surrender, but his gaze was still suspicious. "You can tell someone else about that, but not me," he retorted, crossing his arms. "You must have had at least a liter between 2 drinks." The woman let out a tired sigh, as if she were carrying an invisible burden. "I only had 2 sips with a friend," she confessed, without emotion, as if it didn't matter at all. "Ah, now it makes sense," Jose said, breathing a sigh of relief. He seemed less worried, although there was still a shadow of doubt on his face. She, however, was not affected by the change in Jose's tone. "There's nothing to explain," she replied. "I've been here for a quarter of an hour. It's not my head, it's not the clock. I'm just here." Jose shrugged, as if accepting the statement without further question. Well, if you say you've been here for a quarter of an hour, that's fine. After all, no one cares about 10 minutes more or less. The woman gave a short, humorless laugh. But I do care, Jose. She stretched her arms out on the wooden counter in a carefree gesture, but her eyes didn't hide her tiredness. It's not that I want to, it's just that I've been here for 20 minutes. She looked at the clock again, mentally correcting herself. I counted every second. Jose was silent for a moment, watching her. He knew this woman well enough to know that when something bothered her, she became obsessive about small details. But it wasn't just that. There was something deeper, something she hadn't said yet. He wondered if he should press her or just let her vent in due time. Is something bothering you today, Queen? Jose asked, with unusual gentleness. You're different. More thoughtful, and counting the time. She kept her gaze fixed on the clock, as if avoiding looking at him. I'm just tired, Jose. Very tired. Okay, Queen, Jose said with a deep sigh, as he put the tray of meat on the counter. I'd spend an entire day and your evening just to see you happy. There was a gentleness in his voice that contrasted with the brusque way he moved the objects, as if he were trying to organize more than just the restaurant, perhaps something inside himself. As he spoke, Jose couldn't stop moving. His fingers fiddled with glasses, cutlery, and bottles, adjusting everything with a palpable restlessness. It was as if he were trying to keep himself busy, keeping himself moving to avoid facing what was hanging in the air between them. I want to see you happy, he repeated, but this time his words carried more weight. He stopped suddenly, his eyes finally meeting hers with an intensity he didn't usually display. You know that doesn't mean anything, he said after an uncomfortable pause, his voice lower, as if he were speaking to himself. The woman stared at him coldly, as if she were ready for a confrontation. Do you really think, Jose, that I would stay with you for $1 million? Her question was direct, sharp as a blade that cut the air between them. Jose felt the blow, but tried to compose himself quickly. I didn't mean it like that, Queen, he replied, visibly disconcerted. I bet it was lunch that made you sick. He tried to ease the tension with a flimsy excuse, but he knew he wasn't convincing anyone. It's not that, the woman replied, now with a seriousness that made him stop in mid-motion. No woman would put up with a life like yours, not even for $1 million. Her voice was full of frustration, as if he had been accumulating these feelings for a long time. Jose, annoyed, turned his back to her, trying to get away from the uncomfortable conversation. He began to clean the dusty bottles in the cabinet, looking for a distraction. You're insufferable today, Queen, he murmured, without looking back. I think it's best to eat the steak and go rest. I'm not hungry, the woman replied, turning her gaze back to the street. She watched the pedestrians passing by, as if she were oblivious to the tension between them. The restaurant fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft sound of the bottles that Jose was rearranging. After a few minutes, she broke the silence unexpectedly. It's true that I love you, Papillo, she said, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. There was a sudden change in tone, something that caught Jose off guard. Jose, still without turning around, answered curtly, Is it true, trying to hide any emotion? The woman shifted a little, as if adjusting her posture, but her voice remained calm. What did you say? What? Jose seemed distant, continuing to clean the bottles, not wanting to get too involved. About the $1 million, she explained. Did you forget? Without stopping what he was doing, Jose shrugged and murmured a simple, yes, trying to end the subject. The tension in the air seemed to increase with each passing second, and he didn't know how to escape it. The woman exhaled a puff of smoke and, leaning over the counter, bit her tongue, as if she were carefully considering her next words. Even if I don't sleep with you, she murmured, her words sounding almost like a secret shared between the two. At that moment, Jose finally looked her in the eye. "Do you want me to sleep with you so much?" he asked, walking slowly towards her. He stood facing her, his strong arms resting on the counter, approaching her as if defying what she had said. She watched him closely, her eyes shining for a moment with a mixture of compassion and irony. "I want it so much," Jose said, "that every afternoon I would kill the man who leaves with you." His voice was deep, intense, charged with a passion that he rarely let show. At first, the woman was surprised, but her expression soon changed to one of amusement. Her lips curved into a smile full of irony, and after a brief silence, she let out a loud laugh, echoing through the empty restaurant. "Are you jealous?" she joked, still laughing at his seriousness. Jose looked away, his face flushing slightly with embarrassment. "The truth is, yes," he admitted, with an honesty that didn't match his reserved demeanor. "But it's not the way you think." "So, what is it?" she insisted, now curious. Jose sighed, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a cloth, as if exhausted. "It's just that I don't like seeing you do this," he confessed, his voice finally revealing what he had been holding back for so long. "What?" the woman asked, challenging him with her gaze. "This thing about leaving with a different man every day," Jose said, his words coming out with difficulty, as if they were a burden he had been carrying for a long time. The woman laughed again, this time with a hint of malice. "And what would you do, Jose? Kill them so they wouldn't go with me?" "No," he answered firmly. "I would kill them because you went with them." The conviction in his voice was undeniable, but at the same time, there was a pain there, a wound that she touched with her jokes. The woman shook her head, letting out another laugh, but something soft and intriguing in her tone suggested that she understood the depth of what he was saying. She leaned closer, her eyes locking with his in a gaze that seemed to penetrate his soul. "Would you really kill a man for that?" she asked, challenging him. "Yes," Jose replied, his voice becoming more dramatic, the atmosphere between them growing even thicker. She let out a nervous laugh, as if she didn't quite believe it. "Jose, how awful. The nice, quiet man who never charges me for anything is now revealing himself to be a potential murderer? How scary for you," she mocked, laughing. Jose remained silent, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt. "You're drunk," he said, more firmly now, trying to regain control of the situation. "Go to sleep, you probably aren't even hungry." Jose stopped cleaning the counter and looked at her, surprised by the sudden change in her tone. Silence settled between them, filled with uncertainty. He wiped his hands on his apron, not knowing exactly what to say. His usual relaxed manner seemed to have been replaced by an unexpected seriousness, something that disconcerted him. "Are you leaving?" he asked, as if she needed to confirm what she had just heard. The woman looked away, sighing deeply before answering. "Yes, Jose, I think it's time to move on. This place, this life, they don't serve me anymore." Jose frowned, uncomfortable with the idea of his routine without her constant presence. They had their moments of arguments, exchanges of barbs, but the truth is that he had gotten used to having her around, with her provocations and her disturbing presence. "You say that now," he murmured, "but tomorrow you'll change your mind, like you always do." She shook her head slowly, with a sad smile on her lips. "This time it's different, Jose. There's no going back." He approached, leaning on the counter, looking at her closely. "And where are you going? What are you going to do?" She shrugged, keeping her gaze fixed on a distant point. "I don't know yet, but anywhere is better than continuing here, living this cycle that never changes." Jose felt a pang in his chest. "And me? Where do I fit into this? Are you going to leave me here, taking care of this restaurant, while you go live your adventure somewhere else?" The woman, for the first time that night, seemed truly vulnerable. "You don't need me, Jose. You never did. I'm just another burden in your simple life, messing up everything around me." "Don't talk like that," he said, with more urgency than he intended. You're not a burden. You drive me crazy, yes, but I like you here. She looked at him tenderly, the same tenderness that Jose rarely saw, and it touched him in a strange way. Do you like me here? Or do you like the routine, the idea of having someone to fight with at the end of the day? Because I know you never really wanted me. He hesitated, unable to answer. There was a lump in his throat, and the truth, the one he had kept for so long, seemed to want to escape anyway. But he didn't know how to express it. He didn't know if he wanted to say it out loud. You know I would do anything for you, he murmured, his eyes sad. I already told you I want you happy. If leaving is what will make you happy, then I won't stop you. She smiled sweetly, but her eyes revealed the weariness of someone who has already faced too many battles. Ah, Papillo, you're always so generous. I know that deep down, you want me to stay. But I also know that there will never be a happy ending for the two of us. Jose was silent, staring at the floor, fighting the emotions that seemed about to overflow. I just don't understand why it has to be this way. Why can't you stay and try something different, maybe? She laughed, but it was a joyless laugh. Because I'm not made for it. I don't know how to live simply, like you. I need more, and you would never give me what I truly desire. Do you want $1 million that much? He asked, the bitterness evident in his voice. No, Jose. What I want is priceless, she replied softly. He sighed, shaking his head. Am I not the man you wanted, then? You are, but at the same time, you're not. Complicated, I know. She reached out, lightly touching his arm. You're too good for me. And that's what scares me. Jose closed his eyes for a moment, trying to absorb those words. He had always known that she was complicated, a mix of strength and fragility that left him confused. But he had never imagined that she would leave him forever. I've never been good at goodbyes, he said, trying to hide the pain. Neither have I, she replied, with a sad smile. She stood up slowly, adjusting her clothes as if she were getting ready to leave. The gesture seemed definitive, as if that was the last time she would pass by there. I promise it will be quick, Jose. I won't be here tomorrow, she said, without looking back. Jose wanted to say something, to beg her to stay, but the words stuck. All he could do was watch as she left the restaurant, leaving only the soft echo of her footsteps on the wooden floor. Jose picked up the cloth again and began to clean the window next to her, his attention divided between what he was doing and the words that were coming out of his mouth. Of course you noticed that, but only now that everything is falling apart do you realize that you should have noticed it sooner. The woman smiled, a tired smile full of irony. Yes, I've noticed it for a long time, but only now have I convinced myself that I'm tired of all these men. She raised her head, her gaze fixed on Jose, as if trying to see something that was hidden behind him. The golden afternoon light penetrated through the window, illuminating her features with a touch of melancholy. She continued, I always imagined I could find something different, but the truth is that they all end up being the same. Tiresome, predictable. Jose, without turning around, continued his work, but something in his hands was slower, as if her words were hitting him in an unexpected way. You shouldn't get attached to a woman who loves the wrong man. When she realizes what he really is, disgust consumes everything, even the air she breathes next to him. The woman shook her head, laughing, but the sound was almost sad. Disgust doesn't begin to describe it. Every time I see him, my stomach turns. Not even the strongest soap can get his smell off my skin. She paused, as if reliving an unpleasant moment, then resumed. But sometimes disgust isn't enough. There are things that not even time can erase. Jose finally stopped, pulling away and looking at her for the first time since the conversation had begun. And what would you do then, Queen? She looked back at him, her eyes filled with something deeper, a contained anger, perhaps. If he continues, perhaps a stab from the bottom up will do the trick. Quick, straight to the point. Jose let out a short, almost disbelieving laugh. You're crazy. There's no man who deserves that. She stared at him, firmly. What if it were you, Jose? What if you got tired of a woman as much as I got tired of him? He looked away again, going back to cleaning the counter, but his movements were more hurried, as if he wanted to escape that conversation. That will never happen. I'm not that type. The woman tapped her fingers on the glass, drawing his attention back. Jose, you don't understand. No one understands what it's like to live trapped in something like that. He let out a sigh, a mixture of tiredness and frustration. Maybe I understand more than you think. But, anyway, it's not that bad. She shook her head, as if her patience was running out. I said I'm leaving tomorrow, and you didn't even bother to ask where. Jose stopped, finally looking at her more closely. And where are you going, anyway? The woman sighed, crossing her arms and looking out the window as if the distant horizon held her answer. Far away. Where no one knows me anymore. Where I can start over, far from men who only see me as something to be used. Jose smiled, a sad and resigned smile. And you think you'll find peace like that? By running away? She stared at him, without blinking. I'm not running away, Jose. I'm just freeing myself. He looked at the clock on the wall. The hand showed 6:30, and the first customers were starting to enter the restaurant. Well, then it seems that life will go on, no matter what you do. The woman smiled, but this time there was something sweet in the gesture. Yes, Jose. Life goes on. But sometimes it needs a break. A new beginning. Jose sighed, walking to the kitchen. I'll make you a steak, to say goodbye. She watched him disappear into the kitchen, smelling the meat starting to fry soon after. It was a smell that she had always associated with Jose, with the place, with her own life. Something simple, constant, that never changed. She thought for a moment about how things could have been different, but reality was much more complex than her fantasies. When Jose returned, carrying the plate with the steak, she received it with a slight smile. Thank you, Papillo. For the steak, and for everything else. It wasn't really expensive, but she knew it was from the heart. He nodded, without saying anything, placing the plate in front of her. You've always been a good customer. A friend, even. She took a bite of the meat, tasting the familiar flavor. I'm going to miss this. This place. You. Sometimes the best things in life are the simple things, Jose. But I can't stay here, there are mistakes in my life that force me to leave without looking back and maybe never come back. Jose sat next to her, smelling her perfume and his heart tightening with fear that this would be the last time he would see her, watching the movement of the restaurant begin to come to life. If you ever come back, Queen, let me know. We can start over too, I'll always be here for you. She smiled again, but this time with a touch of hope. Maybe I'll come back. And, who knows, things will be different. Only time can tell which path our lives will take, but know that you will always be in my heart. The two remained silent for a moment, sharing that farewell without needing any more words. Deep down, Jose hoped that she wouldn't leave and that the following afternoon, when the clock struck 6 in the evening, she would come in looking beautiful with a cigarette between her fingers, and even if she went out with another man, he knew she would be close by. But the next morning, she left without a set destination, taking with her the good and bad memories of a life full of love and disappointments. She carried in her thoughts Jose, who had always treated her like a queen, but who said she could never live that simple, routine life that he had to offer. Jose watched the clock strike 6 in the evening and the door didn't open. She had really left, leaving behind the longing and the hope that one day, perhaps, she would come back and things could be different and she could live a simple life with just one man. She never came back and Jose never forgot her, always looking at the door at 6 in the evening hoping she would come in wearing a black dress and holding a cigarette between her fingers. Leave a comment here if you liked our story and subscribe to our channel for more love stories.